So I went ahead and marked that out on here, but what I did prior to this step was go ahead and cut it down from a block this size. I just ripped this down into scales, so manageable scale size, and then we went ahead and flattened everything, first with the 2x72 and then with a sheet of 100 grit sandpaper on the actual workbench and flattened it. So they had a nice flattened side on here, so the scales met up real well. And then we went ahead and what you saw there, marked where the tang is going to be. It just gives me a decent little reference point just in case something shifts and I need to realign it. I can. But then we're going to go ahead, clamp this down, get this front pinhole drilled through. We're going to be using 3/16 brass pins for this hole, the hole that's back here, and then for the lanyard tube we're going to do a 3/16 hollow tube, also made of brass. But right now we need to go ahead, go over to the drill press, get this first hole drilled through. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and cut out the scales on the porta band saw. And what I do is I go ahead and keep the pins in here because on some of the scales, I end up cutting the whole entire spine area off, and that gets rid of the tape that's been holding it together this whole entire time. So we're going to go ahead, leave the pins in here, make sure that they're kind of flush on the back side here so that it doesn't rock or anything. And then we're going to cut all the excess off that we can with this, and we'll finalize the shape on the 2x72. So let's go ahead, get this cut. So now that we have the rough shape cut out on the porta band saw, we're going to focus on the ricasso area of this. So this is where the scales are going to meet the flats of the ricasso. Now you can't focus on this area once you've done the glue up, because at that point, if you try to sand this, you're going to risk scratching the finish on your finished blade. So we want to go ahead and smooth this and then put whatever bevel we want to do on the front of it. I'm going to do a slight bevel on both sides, kind of round it over, and then go from there. So now that we've got to the point to where we're ready to do this glue up, I'm going to go ahead and do the split camera thing where I have you up here and I have you down here and then I have you up here so that you can actually see what I'm doing with my hands whenever I start doing those things. Now, when it comes to the glue up, there's a few things that you want to really focus on here. You want to make sure, for one, that your tang is completely flat, because if your tang has a wave in it and your handle scales are flat, your handle scales are going to try and flex to fit the tang. And what's going to end up happening is eventually it's going to just have enough pressure pulling out that it's going to end up popping, and you're going to have a gap where there's no epoxy or anything like that, because eventually those scales can take on water. They can do all kinds of different things with humidity and temperatures and all kinds of stuff. Some micartas shrink a little bit. A lot of things happen after your glue up. So you want to make sure that your tang is flat, that your scales are flat, and that you do not have gaps throughout them. It's really important. I see some knife makers who are just getting into this. They get to the point to where they're ready to put handle scales on, but the stuff's not flat and they're wondering why they have gapping and how they can fix those things. Just make sure that you take the time to just do your prep work right. It might take an extra 15-20 minutes, but it's worth it in the long run, because that knife should last longer than you. And if you cheat out or go the fast way and skip those steps, it won't. So it's important. Make sure you have things flat. Other thing is going to be making sure that you do some of the things that make it to where you have a best chance at a mechanical bond. So like this down here, one of the things that I do, and a lot of you'll see knife makers do this, they'll drill holes through the tang for both weight saving and so that the epoxy can pass through from one side to the other and attach the handle scale to the handle scale on both sides. And then you'll also have some people like me, I go through and I drill little divots in the back side of my scales so that whenever these get squeezed together, that epoxy can go inside those little divots and end up, again, just creating a better mechanical bond throughout the whole entire set of handle scales. So you're not just gluing flat to flat. There's a chance that can end up messing up if you go to start chopping with this thing. So just one of the things that I do to make sure that I get a good mechanical bond. Plus, I make sure that I have a nice set of flat scales that, are going to end up being how I want them to be. Now, for this, you want to make sure that you don't end up squeezing out the epoxy. And I'm going to get into this, but there's going to be a little bit of time-lapse stuff because doing this glue up takes a lot of time. You just want to make sure that whenever you are going through and you are clamping this, so you're clamping the scales down, you want to clamp them down enough that they close the gap, but you don't want to go so far past that you squeeze all of the epoxy out. So it has to be like a fine line of tight, but not too tight. So that's what we're going to be doing whenever we start this. What I'm going to go ahead and do now is get this all cleaned up with acetone so that we can then start the glue up. We go ahead, get our gloves on. Now, I had somebody ask me what brand gloves these are, and it is just this brand right here, Venom Steel. Really like these. They have a nice texture to them, so whenever I'm grinding with them or holding on to something, I actually like these over the real thin, non-textured gloves. So these good old bright orange gloves here. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to start cleaning everything here with some acetone. I'm going to go through, clean our pins. Then we're going to clean our tang. And then I'll even go through and rub down the back side of my scales just in case I have some oils on there from my hands. So we've got this all cleaned. One of the steps that I like to do from this point is go ahead and tape up our blade. And you don't have to get super crazy with this. I end up just taping up a decent portion of it. It doesn't have to be like super pretty or anything like that. I will tell you, using tape with gloves, not the easiest thing. So we're just taping up the blade so we don't get a bunch of epoxy on there. And I use this 5-minute epoxy. This is just JB Weld brand 5-minute epoxy. It's a personal preference. I'm probably going to end up going with something like G-Flex or something like that whenever I run out of this. Some people probably wonder why I go through and take the lids off as opposed to just squeezing it out. It's just a personal preference. And I pretty much just eyeball the amounts. I know a lot of people go through and 100% measure these. I haven't had a bad result yet with eyeballing it. So I'm gonna just go through, get this mixed up. You really want to get it mixed up nice and thoroughly. But you do want to get it mixed up pretty quick because you only have so long to actually mess with this. Now, what I do is I go through and I coat each individual piece before I actually stick anything together. And I'll go through and put epoxy inside each one of the pinholes just to make sure that you have epoxy in there. Because if you don't, you can end up putting your pins in and not have any mechanical bond going through the actual pinholes. I'm going to go through and make sure there's epoxy inside those little recessed divots. There's one. And I'm not putting a lot on here. I'm just getting enough to coat everything. And that's it. Now we're going to take our pins and just dab it in the epoxy. Dab it. For the hollow one, the lanyard tube, we just want to push that one through. We don't want to dab that one. And the only reason is because you'll end up getting a bunch of epoxy down in the tube. And I tend to go a little bit longer with my lanyard tubes. I go longer with the pins and everything, but I go longer with the lanyard tubes just because I want to make sure that I can cut off any of the area where the epoxy filled in, like that right there. And if you go through and you make sure that everything is right, you should easily be able to put your pins in without having to bang them around. I've had a bunch of times where I've had to do the whole bang around thing, but just take your time and make sure you don't have to do that. And then we're going to go ahead and start clamping. Like I said, you just want to give it enough to get it tight, but without going through and making it ridiculous. Go all the way back here to the back. All right. Everything looks good there. Now what I tend to do is I'll go through and just make sure that the epoxy is nice and even all the way down where it's meeting the handle scales. Make sure there's no bubbles or anything like that. Is it necessary? No. It's just a personal preference. Now we want to go ahead and clean off the area where, let's put this back here, where the handle scales meet the ricasso. And you just want to be careful not to go too crazy around this area, because you could accidentally get acetone down in that little area right there, and it will eat away the epoxy all the way up at the front. You don't want that to happen. You want to make sure that this stays bonded. So there you go. Now that we have this all glued up, that's pretty much the end of this video. Hopefully this was helpful for y'all, me actually breaking it down and y'all seeing the different steps. If it was, make sure you give this video a thumbs up. Share this video or one of my other videos. Guys, if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel. Remember, this is a giveaway knife. Once we hit 20,000 subscribers, we're going to do a giveaway for this knife. The way it's looking, we'll probably hit the 20,000 right as I finish this knife. So in the next episode, we're going to go ahead and we're going to shape these handle scales. And yeah, it's going to end up looking like a knife at that point. So basically, we got 2 videos left. Shaping handle scales and then going through, putting an edge on it, making sure it's sharp, chopping some stuff, cutting some stuff. So guys, thank y'all for coming by. Thank y'all for spending your time with me. Y'all have an amazing day. Y'all stay safe out there. I'll catch y'all next time.